So, I'm going to talk today about teaching literacy for love and wisdom. Now, I'm going to play the old preacher here. So I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. Then I'm going to tell you what I'm telling you. Then I'm going to tell you what I told you. All right, so you get it 3 times. So, we must teach for our own personal growth and the personal growth of our students. That's one major point. We must be the change we wish to see in the world. You know, that's that Gandhi quote. You must be the change you wish to see in the world. In our teaching and in our lives. If we want our kids to read, we have to model reading. If we want the kids to write, we have to write with the kids. And this has to do with the role of teacher reflectivity and teacher research. If we want the kids to inquire, we have to be inquiring. We have to inquire into our teaching. We have to inquire into our kids' experience, into how they're learning, so that we can learn from them how to best teach them. And finally, the interactive dimensions of reading from my book, You Gotta Be the Book, mirror the processes of personal and social transformation. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I was reading this Milosz poem. He was the Nobel Prize winner back in the 80s, called Dedication. What is poetry which does not save nations or people? It is a connivance with official lies, a song of drunkards whose throats will be cut in a moment, readings for sophomore girls. That I wanted good poetry, that I discovered late its salutary aim. In this, and only this, I find salvation. And this really struck me because I thought, what is teaching that does not save nations and people? It is a connivance with official lies. What is teaching that makes a difference, that enlivens our students, that transforms them and serves them as complete human beings in their personhood and the world? I don't know about you, but I'm getting old, and I'm probably closer to the end of my career than the beginning, and I'm getting less and less patience with doing things that don't matter to me or to my kids. So I think we got to be asking every day, what is it are we teaching for? What are the takeaways? What are our bottom lines, the things that at the end of the day better have gotten done? When our kids leave our class, this better have been achieved, or we did not do what we believed in. What is absolutely humanly important to know and be able to do? How are schools, assessments, policies, and the like serving these purposes or not? And if they're not, how do we work around them? Because I know that teachers can be very good at that. And in my own school, I do a lot of things I don't like to do, but I make sure I get the things done that must be done for my kids, even if it means I close my door and I do what must be done. What can we do as teachers to work for higher purposes within the current constraints? Because we have way more freedom than we usually admit. And what are the transformational possibilities of literacy education? Now, as I get older, am teaching more and more with a sense of urgency. By the way, that's me when I was in Australia. And there's, yeah, that's a lie. I thought you guys knew about irony and unreliable narrative. There's nowhere to hide for ourselves or our kids, and I believe we are aiming much too low. The demands placed on our students are ever growing. The problems we face in the world are growing in complexity. The issues are global. The yardstick for success is no longer improvement by national standards, but the best performing education systems. Wow. You can read the newspaper any day. Global climate change, which we're experiencing today with it being 60 degrees in Pennsylvania in January. You know, there's so many issues that our children are going to have to solve. And if we teach them information, they're not going to be able to solve them, because the data and the processes for solving the problems that we're already facing don't exist yet. they're going to have to learn how to learn. They're going to have to learn how to frame and solve problems. They're going to have to learn how to think outside the box. And there's only one way to do that, and that's if we create educational environments that will require and reward them for doing so. Now, I started this study that I wrote about in Teaching Literacy for Love and Wisdom as a study about inquiry. And what I found was the 8 teachers in the study actually were going way beyond what I had expected to see. They were going way beyond teaching the kids to inquire for understanding. They were all teaching for something bigger, which I have got to call wisdom, although only one of the teachers in the study actually called it that. And what they all shared in common, 8 fantastic writing project teachers, was that they believed teaching and learning are relational. And they spent a lot of time getting to know their kids and celebrating their kids and valuing their kids. They were teaching for understanding and use. So deep understanding and application in the world. And I do have to ask, if we're not teaching for understanding and use, what in the heck are we teaching for? The PSA test, which sounds like something that men have to do when they go for their physical. But they went beyond the use to thinking about social action and service. Every unit these teachers taught ended in applications that were in service of the self, but also other people. They moved from essential questions, which is part of inquiry, like what we did this morning when we talked about contextualizing Romeo and Juliet in what makes and breaks relationships, or studying what are your civil rights and how do you best protect them. They went beyond that to what you'd have to call existential questions about how to be in the world. They didn't ask essential questions that didn't have immediate implications for being different in your everyday life. And they made the material come alive in the context of the student's lived experience, using what was learned for transformed attitudes, behaviors, goals, service, and ways of being. Now, I've given this talk a couple times, and people have said, hey, you never actually defined wisdom. So let me do that. What is wisdom? According to the teachers in our study, it could be defined like this. Wisdom is becoming increasingly more conscious of interconnectedness between people, between groups, and between people and creation. I personally think that's a pretty big challenge that our country is facing today. Developing a profound respect for others and other perspectives. Not to get too political, but one thing I admire very much about our current president is I think he has successfully done that on a global level. Cultivating compassion. Being guided by a greater good than materialism, status, and image. And again, that's a pretty big cultural challenge. Valuing stillness and reflection. Seeking guidance from an inner versus outer locus of control. Developing inner awareness of one's own identity, perceptions, motivation, and possibilities, and therefore of other people who might be different than you. And despite the fact that they're different, their perspective might have some value. And a commitment to agency. By agency, to service and social action for a communitarian good. So this is how these teachers enacted what they would define as wisdom. Now, I'd like you to think of an experience with a book that transformed you and stayed with you. It kind of sits on your shoulder and whispers to you sometime. When you have problems, you might think with the experiences of the literary characters. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about when I say we teach for love and wisdom. I want to tell a story about my oldest daughter and an experience she had with transformation. She was in 2nd grade. She had a fabulous teacher who had been her teacher in 1st grade as well. And she came home one day, and she was very excited because they were doing research. And she wanted to research pirates. So we went to the library and we picked up Jane Yolen's The Pirate Queen, and we picked up a pirate cookbook, and we picked up a bunch of other stories about pirates and a pirate dictionary so we could learn how to talk pirate and all these kind of things. And we went home and we made pirate stew, and we had a refrigerator box, and she made an anatomically correct pirate ship. You know, it had a bowsprit and it had a crow's nest made out of an olive jar and all these kind of things. So she was totally into it. Now, I'm kind of a laissez-faire father. Maybe most fathers are, I don't know. In other words, if I don't hear breaking bones, I really don't worry too much about what's going on in the house. So, it was one Saturday, and my wife was gone, and my two daughters had two friends over, and they were playing pirates. And they were doing all kinds of pirate things, and I was working in a book, type, 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 type. Well, my wife came home and she said, "Darling, what did you do with the money in my wallet?" Now, this happens in my house all the time. So I said, "I didn't do anything with the money in your wallet. You spent it." And she said, "No, I am very sure I did not." And I go, "Well, I never touched your wallet." So anyway, we had lunch, and the pirates still keep playing, and my wife went off to the bank and came back and did some other stuff, and the pirates are walking the plank and doing this and that. And my wife comes in and she goes, "Well, how do you explain this, Mr. Man?" And she showed me an empty bank envelope with a receipt for $125, and there was nothing in it. So then I thought, oh my gosh, what's going on? Are people coming in our house? They're stealing our money. And then it struck me. Pirates. So we sent the two friends home and got the two girls under the Klieg lights, and what was kind of alarming was my younger one was like, "I don't know anything about any money." You know, she was a complete denial. My older one started to crack, so we concentrated on her. And her lower lip was quivering, and she was like, "I don't want to say because pirates get hung unless they're pregnant, which I don't think I am." And I'm going, thank God for that. That comes straight out of the Pirate Queens, by the way. They couldn't hang the Pirate Queens because they said they were pregnant. Anyway, she eventually cracked, and we went out in the yard and we dug up $243.30. Now, my wife was crazy about this. She goes, "We must teach them not to steal, that is wrong." And I'm like, this is so cool. They became pirates. They thought they were pirates. They were living through the story. They entered the perspective. She goes, "Shut up." Well, this story does have a serious point, which is all of the arts, the drama we did this morning, simulations, action strategies, visual arts, are powerful tools to teach reading and to promote deep understanding. The arts give us a third space of possibility that is neither the self or the author and characters, but is something in between where we integrate. That is neither school or the home. It is a new space of transformational possibility. All the teachers in our study used the arts in this way. Now, my first book was called You Gotta Be the Book. And my friend Bruce Novak, who is a philosopher, he told me one day that he thought that what I had outlined as the interactive dimensions of response, which expert readers all go through whenever they successfully read, were in fact the path toward wisdom in every wisdom tradition. And that became a genesis for much of what we did in this book. What I found was that whenever a good reader reads, they first evoke experience. Now, Paul Ricoeur, the literary theorist, calls this the present made fully present. And I think you know from being good readers that when you read, it is fully present to you. You are living through that text as if it is actually occurring in the now of time. Art is a way of making special. Art is a way of providing a transitional object between what we are and what we can imagine being. It paves the path to new possibilities for thinking, believing, and becoming. In that study, I found that the students who were successful readers very willingly engaged with the text. They began to visualize that text, and they participated fully in the text as an unmentioned character or as one of the characters. The next phase of response is connecting. And this is what Paul Ricoeur calls the present made past. So you connect what you are reading to your prior experience, and you let it speak to that prior experience. This is where you make the self to text or text to text or self to other kinds of connections. Text to the world. Now, David Perkins, cognitive scientist at Harvard, says knowledge is not a line, it is a network. And if kids are going to be creating knowledge when they read, they have to connect what they are reading to their past experience and back to the world. And that is the essence of inquiry, that you personally connect to what you're learning, and then you connect what you're learning back to the world in a way that is useful and transformative. The final dimensions of response are reflective. Paul Ricoeur would call this the present made future, where you say, so what? I lived through this experience with the character, I learned this. What does it mean to my future? How is this reading an imaginative rehearsal for living, where I critique, apply, transform, act and serve, becoming and being something different, outgrowing my current self. And I would argue that's our job as teachers, to help our students outgrow their current selves. When we engage in immersive reading, I would argue that what transpires between the text and the reader is the me, the not me, becoming a new we. It's the reader and the text, as Louise Rosenblatt would say, becoming something new that is neither the reader or the text. It is what Rosenblatt calls the poem. It's a pleasure and a fundamental, even essential way of becoming more fully human and more of our best possible self. And yet I must say, research on the teaching of reading and literature shows that it is rarely taught for those purposes. The text becomes a transitional object that propels us into newly possible selves and futures. And as we do this, we identify with the author's thoughts, emotions, and life so that we can recast our own, either through acceptance, resistance, transformation, or adaptation. I want to talk a little about my wife. This is my sweetie. We've been married 28 years. She has a very rare, undiagnosed vascular disease. She spent 3 months in a coma last fall. We've been to the NIH Undiagnosed Disease Clinic, the Mayo Clinic, the Harvard Vascular Clinic. We've been all over the world. They don't know what's wrong with her, and twice a year she's in a life-threatening circumstance. The doctors have told me 4 times that she was terminal. And you have never seen someone who has such a will to live. It's inspiring. One of the things that happens when you know you're dying is that it steals your concentration. Something that happens when you have a spouse that's dying is it steals your concentration. And you really don't have much tolerance for what doesn't really matter. Now, Peggy is a teacher, and she is on my case all the time. And her challenge is, how are you teaching for wisdom and use? How are you getting after the stuff that really matters? In the unit that I referred to this morning, what makes and breaks relationships, she said to me, how are you helping kids learn how to bracket out anger so they can engage in better relationships? How are you helping them to take 3 deep breaths whenever they want to punch somebody? How are you teaching them to enter into and value other perspectives? How are you teaching them to think about where to draw the line in their relationships? You know, when is a relationship no longer good for you? How do you extricate yourself? You know, when I said, I don't know, she goes, then what are you teaching for? Right? Because she's got her eyes on the prize. She can't afford not to. She has to say, what's the real takeaway every day? What am I making sure is getting done and that is not going to be left undone because it is so important? You know, it's easy not to think about those things when you think you got tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And when you think you don't, you start thinking about those things. Her argument is basically make the teaching literature, not about the literature, but about life. Because that's why literature was written. That's why we do what we do in school, because we believe it is going to lead to more democratic, conjoint, powerful, personally fulfilling living. And yet, I know I forget about that. She says, remind yourself of that every day. Here's my wife in the Mayo with our older daughter. One of the things that's been interesting is that she's had 15 cerebral hemorrhages. And you may know that when you have bleeding in the brain, you get brain damage. And so I've been reading a lot about the brain. That's my younger daughter. She's cute too. And one of the things that we know from recent brain research is about neuroplasticity. This is such interesting stuff, and it shows why what we do is so important. Because we're changing kids' brains through what we do, for better or for worse. So we better be thinking really hard about what we're doing. The mind can be trained to change your brain. There were a lot of studies done in the last 15 years. The Dalai Lama was in on this at the University of Wisconsin. And what they found was you can teach people to change the very structures in your brain. They taught university students to meditate. And here's just one for instance. Before the meditation training, they would show the kids photographs of children who were deformed. And basically their reaction was one of disgust. After 6 weeks of meditation and compassion meditation, they showed them similar pictures, and totally different parts of the brain lit up. Parts of the brain that are related to compassion. And the kids had different reactions. Now, I don't think anybody's going to argue you can really learn to meditate in 6 weeks, and yet the 6 weeks changed the kids' brains and changed the ways they were responding, from a gut level. So you can teach kids to be kinder. You can teach them to enter and respect other people's perspective. But you got to just practice, practice, practice. And that practice changes the kid's brain. We grow neurons and neuronal networks throughout our lives, and this growth comes from working through new challenges. Whatever you're doing, you're growing brain. So are you growing the kind of brain you want, for the kind of purposes you want to fulfill? Or are you growing something else? The research on the brain basically shows, this comes from Deutsch's book, The Brain That Makes Itself, nurture is more powerful than nature when it comes to brain structuring and ways of thinking, behaving, and being. People, this is another thing that's been found which is very helpful to my wife and myself. People can overcome negative prior experiences, habits, and ways of being. People can overcome strokes. My wife's had 15 of them. And severe brain injuries with the right environments and support. My wife is a musician. She's taught herself twice now to reread music. She's taught herself to read again. She's taught herself to do a lot of things like cook again. She's able to do it because the brain is plastic, and if you get the right support and the right assistance in the right context, you can grow your brain and you can recover from very severe injuries. Again, Deutsch, The Brain That Changes Itself, Begley's Train Your Mind, Change Your Brain are two great resources about this neuroplasticity research. I want to turn to one of my National Writing Project fellows. Her name is Claire Yoakum, and I team taught with her last year an inquiry framed by the existential question, what is a true friend? Now, here's what you got to ask. What makes a compelling question to your students? And what makes a compelling question that could be applied to the world? If you get those two things, if you get a question that's intrinsically interesting to your kids and can be applied to the world, that gets after the enduring understandings and transformations you're working for, you've got an unbelievable existential question. In other words, we're asking what matters? And how can we teach the reading and the writing and all that kind of stuff through these compelling, important existential questions? Here's one thing that Claire did in the class. This comes from Chicken Soup for the Child's Soul, I think. And it's a much longer story, but this is kind of an abstract of it. It's called The Forgotten Friend. On my 10th birthday, double digits, I would have my biggest party ever. In my notebook, I kept a list of friends I would invite, and it grew from 7 to 17. Nearly every girl in my 5th grade class was invited. The family room was a flurry of laughter when the doorbell rang. I rounded the corner and my face turned red. How had I forgotten to invite Sarah, the quiet girl who sat beside me in music? She gave me a small package, and when I invited her to stay, she told me she could not even for a little while. The gift was a handmade ceramic cat resembling my own pet, Seymour. And the note told me it was a symbol of good fortune. And it was, because though I regretted my oversight, I came to value Sarah. She became my truest friend, who has stood by me through adolescence and now into adulthood. So the kids read this story. It's about 10 pages long. And we had them do a think, pair, share. And we said, write or tell about a story about someone who was excluded. Could be yourself, could be somebody else, something you've observed. Rewrite the story so that person would be included. Think about this in a symbolic level. How can we rewrite the circumstances of our lives? I've stopped getting upset with students when they don't do homework or there's a problem. I go, all right, what's done is done. How can we rewrite that? What can we do so this work gets done? What can we do so this problem is addressed? Because that's really all that matters. I want the kids to do the work. Why would I penalize them for not doing it? And quite often I got pretty good excuses. So I'm like, how can we move forward? How can we rewrite that last scene? Our lives are revisable, just like our brains. Share. Respond to the story shared with you. What can we learn from such stories? What can we learn from such stories about the concept of friendship and about other issues, problems, and topics? So putting friendship in that network of knowledge about related issues. We have the kids do these Freyer models. So specific instances and examples of friendship from our life, from our reading, specific non-examples. Then we start extracting principles. What are principles and characteristics of being a good friend? What is a working definition of friendship? What are the kids doing in 4th grade? They're meeting all these Common Core state standards. They are researching their lives. They are reading literature to inquire. They are looking for patterns of meaning from their life and across text. And they are theorizing about what makes a good friend in a way that could be used in their life. Now they're learning everything that we'd want to teach them about reading and writing, but it's in service of this very big thing that's going to be important throughout their lives. And that I don't think we talk about enough. What is it to be a good friend? Now, we engage in a lot of service learning. This is a new thing for me that I've been engaging in the last few years. I'm trying to make every inquiry unit in an actual service learning project. One of the cool things about that is you got to be teaching kids to connect what they're learning to the world, or you can't do the service. And I'm not talking about service learning that's collecting cans or something. I'm talking about using the substance of the curriculum and applying it to life. Here's some things that happened in that class. There was a class grandparent project where some of the older people from the community came in and helped with the class. And then we would actually go to their houses and help them do things, like clean up the yard or work around the house, that kind of thing. All of these people were single, so they were living alone. At the end of the year, it was unbelievable because the kids and these senior citizens had created these deep relationships that had enriched them both. You know, you might have thought on one level, well, the grandparents doing a favor to us or we're doing a favor to them, but in fact, they were doing mutual favors. And one guy, he begged, he goes, let me go with the kids to the next grade. Because that was the kind of relationship they had. We did a friendship project where the kids wrote a friendship oath about how to be a better friend to someone they were a friend with. And then to keep a record of how well they were doing in being the kind of friend they wanted to be. We did a new student project. This was the student's idea. When a new kid comes to our school, how do we include them? Who eats lunch with them? Who introduces them to other people? You know, that kind of thing. I think that's awesome. In the middle school where I teach, a lot of times new kids come and they eat alone. I think that's wrong. And if you read To Kill a Mockingbird and the kids let that happen, they didn't learn anything from To Kill a Mockingbird. We've got to change how we live from the literature we read. And then this grew to a new student and a refugee parent project because one of the kids said, hey, what about the parents? And we realized that these parents are totally marginalized. Boise's a huge refugee city. We have 147 different languages in the Boise schools. And these parents are coming, they don't speak English. And nothing's happening for them. This led to, they found out that the families didn't have ways to get around. So the kids did a bicycle project. They found bicycles and refurbished them so the kids and the parents could get around. They found that they didn't have a way to get like to soccer, which is something most of the kids are good at. And so they created a soccer league where the refugee kids would play with the traditional Boiseans. They translated, with the help of the new kids, several of school policies and guides for how to get around the school and solve problems in the schools into different languages. You know, these kids, 4th grade, doing all these kinds of service. And most of it were their own ideas. And all related to what does it mean to be a good friend. We try to celebrate our service learning. Here's what one of the kids said. I love service learning so much, M-U-T-C-H, that when I grow up, I want to do more than most people. I want to open more doors to a new beginning for children less fortunate than me. I want to help. I think this is amazing how much we, the whole school, H-O-L-E, help the community. I just wish all schools and all people were as giving and kind. I hope with all my heart that this school will keep doing what it's doing and helping people around the world. Now, can you pick up the tone of that? I mean, the kid's heart is full at the end of this unit. And I would argue if the kids' hearts are not full, we're not actualizing the potential of what we're doing in our classroom. Here's some other quotes from the kids. This is Lily. I have stood up for people and invited people to play with us. That is the effect that Maniac McGee has had on me. This is JC. Never the stars made me feel closer to people who are different from me because of religion or customs or looks or even the time period they lived in. Like I look at older people differently now as people too. We've lived through stuff. Thank you, Jason. Anne-Marie was risking her life to help others. It made me think that if she could do that, then I can help my family and classmates with little things like chores and homework. These are the kids' reflections after the unit. Now let's go back to those interdependent dimensions of response. Notice how the kids evoked the text that they read in ways that made the present fully present. Notice how they connected what they were reading and learning back to their past and also toward the world and their future. So it was the past made present and the present made past. And when they reflected, the present was being made future and the future was made present. And it changed their ways of being and ways of thinking in the world. Existential inquiry is becoming immersed with the substance of the curriculum and each other through interactive activities. It is entering into dialogic conversation with each other and other perspectives in ways that deepen understanding. It's being alive to each other, listening to each other and our ideas into fuller existence. This is something I've realized, that when I really listen to a kid, I can listen that kid into existence. I can listen possibilities into being. And if I get the kids to listen to each other respectfully, then they start listening each other into existence and a new kind of community into existence. Existential inquiry is involving our lives in play with one another in ways that do real work. Now, Common Core state standards coming down the pike, put into law in Pennsylvania and 46 other states. 2014, you're going to be taking the Smarter Balanced test, which does not reward information recall. The kids are going to get all the data, and they're going to have to operate on the data. They're going to have to infer. They're going to have to see data patterns. They're going to have to analyze, compare, and contrast. They're going to have to do stuff. In other words, the kids are going to have to learn how to think. I'm only speaking for my state. The kids are not going to be ready for this. There's going to be blood on the floor because we're teaching stuff that never counted in the world and now no longer is going to count on the assessments. Now, Notice the Common Core state standard, anchor standards that we met in that friendship unit. The kids read and composed a wide variety of texts. They read and wrote narrative, informational text, and argument. They read closely to determine explicit meanings and to draw logical inferences. They cited specific evidence to support conclusions. That runs through the Common Core at all grade levels. The Common Core is vertical, as you know, so all this stuff runs through all grade levels. They analyzed how and why individuals, events, and ideas interacted over the course of a text and over the course of a lifetime. They composed narratives to develop real or imagined experiences and events using well-chosen details and well-structured events. They drew evidence from text to support analysis, reflection, and research. They came to understand how texts are constructed to create specific meanings and effects. And I could go on. We basically met every reading and writing anchor standard through one unit. If you do inquiry, you're going to be teaching the procedures that are in the Common Core. And I got to say, I like the Common Core. It's smart. It's consistent with cognitive science. And my worry is that if it gets screwed up, it'll be teachers who screw it up. That we will not grab the opportunity to leverage this for the good of our kids and the good of our profession. Because the Common Core is given more freedom to teachers than I have ever seen in any standards project. And basically, that's going to allow us to stake a more professional identity for ourselves, but also in the eyes of the public. Inquiry and wisdom are transactional. It strikes me that all of these aspects of wisdom that I referred to earlier involve the interpenetration of an I and a you into a new us. That's what Louise Rosenblatt talks about with the literary transaction. And this becomes a new kind of community. Wisdom, that is, involves creating third spaces of possibility. And of course, one of our most powerful tools for inquiring, for understanding each other, for building and deepening conceptual and procedural understandings, and becoming a community is the process of respectful dialogic conversation, where you converse with people who are different from you, characters who are different from you in time, place, or experience, with authors who have a different perspective. That's how we become wiser, not by watching Fox News or MSNBC and only getting one point of view. You become wise by respecting and entertaining other perspectives. Because when you do that, you're going to grow and learn. Look, if I'm right, I should want to talk to you so you can be right too. If I'm wrong, I should want to talk to you so I can get corrected. And if it's probably most likely the case that I'm kind of right and kind of wrong, the only way to get more right is to have respectful conversations with other people. In Areopagitica, John Milton wrote, "Truth was never bested by a bad argument, lest the arguments were not made." And I'm afraid that too often in our culture, we don't make the arguments and we're not willing to listen to the arguments of others. And that means we cannot become more wise. We are not engaging in respectful dialogic conversation. And therefore, we can't be transformed. I'm going to conclude by telling another story about my older daughter, Fiona. My poor daughter, Fiona. She is a thinker. She is countercultural. She has suffered through 16 years of schooling. When she took Western civilization, now if I'm teaching history, and I love history, my bottom lines are going to be, learn the joy of history. Think about the world historically. Read history. Think like a historian when you're at the polls, when you're reading the newspaper. Oh, maybe you might want to read the newspaper. Discuss current events. Decide how to live your life by thinking historically. Well, what did she get? A bunch of facts that she probably forgot. And the decision not to study any history in college, because I've had enough of all that. One day she's at home. She's got this huge textbook. She's trying to read it. She goes, I go, "What's going on, sweetie?" She goes, "We're reading about the rise of the textile industry in the Middle Ages, in Middle Europe." Wow, I wonder why she hates world history. And I said, "Why do you think you're doing this?" She goes, "I got no freaking clue." And I said, "Well, maybe the teacher is trying to get you to think about why do civilizations rise and fall." And she goes, "No, Dad, he's not on about that." Well, think if the teacher was. What if he had said at the beginning of the year, we're going to do an existential inquiry, what makes civilizations rise and fall. And to start off the unit, let's say he started with front-loading, and he said, I want you to write about all the things that Americans are entirely devoted to today. I guarantee you the kids would say things like cars, the oil industry, technology, computers. Then he could say, I tell you what, I wonder whether our devotion to those industries, to those values, is leading us in an ascent or a decline. And at the end of this unit, I'm going to ask you to write a paper about whether America is in ascent or decline, and you're going to have to use historical evidence from other cultures to make your case. Now, let's read about the rise of the textile industry in Middle Europe and figure out at what point that helped them to rise and at what point their over-devotion led to their fall, the fall of the Hansestädte in Middle Europe. Then, my daughter would have been all over it because it would have had a personally compelling purpose that could be connected to today. But because he was just doing history, she didn't get it. And he failed in what I would consider to be all the major takeaways. Every week they had a multiple choice test, which I would call mystical guess. Right? And she would come home and she would be so angry. And she'd go, Dad, John Locke. I go, yeah. Do you think he privileged the individual, the society, or the relationship between the individual and society? And I said, well, I think the relationship. She goes, that's what I said, and I got it wrong, and blah, 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 blah. And she had like several reasons. So she was playing guess what the teacher already knows. And she guessed wrongly, even though she had many reasons why. And the teacher thinks he learned something about her understanding. And there was another kid who guessed right, and he guessed wildly, and he had no reasons, and he got it right. Her problem was, she's a thinker. Don't we want to be valuing that? So, you know, the tragedy to me of American education is how easily it could be different. We could teach the same stuff we say we value with a few little tweaks, like make it into an inquiry context and use some new methodologies that actually have the kids doing the work and work toward culminating projects in service learning. And we could be doing the same stuff with those little tweaks. And the kids would love it. And they would learn. Because I've never met a kid who doesn't want to stake his identity and doesn't want to make a contribution to other people. I've taught some rough kids. And I've never met a kid who doesn't want to make a positive difference in his own life and that of others. And we can easily teach for that. I want to comment. How much time do I have? Okay. Oh, I got 15 more minutes. Wow. Awesome. Well, you might have to say that, but here's another really interesting way of thinking about things that I talked about in my morning session. This comes from Scott Fry, who's a professor at Michigan State, and he talks about constrained versus unconstrained skills. His argument is in schools, we spend all this time on constrained skills that has no payoff. Well, it has a very little payoff, but we teach it after it has a payoff, instead of doing unconstrained skills. Now, constrained skills are those that has no further benefit after a certain level of mastery is achieved. So, letters, sounds, phonemic awareness, names, decoding, fluency, prototypical features of print and text. He says these are minimal competencies and they're learned best in service of unconstrained skill development. For instance, in my school, we keep doing fluency long after the kids are reading fluently enough. Because once you're reading 90 words a minute, you don't need to be more fluent. That's fast enough to comprehend. And what we do on the overemphasis is we're taking time away from things that actually really matter, and we're making the kids think that all reading is going fast, which it's not. I happen to be a very slow reader, and I think I'm quite good. The unconstrained skills are those that are developed with benefits throughout a lifetime. Conceptual knowledge, comprehension, genre knowledge, inferencing capacity. All the stuff in the Common Core are unconstrained skills after second grade. They're all unconstrained skills. The CCS is filled with generative procedures. The constrained skills are important, but once they're learned, their importance is over. There's no further benefit. And even when they are being learned, they need to be in service of unconstrained skills. Because no kid ever got motivated to learn by the CR blend. Or by inferencing. But kids will learn that stuff if they're reading and writing important stuff that is interesting and powerful in the world. Rachel Kessler says, young people who thrive have encountered deep connection. They feel they belong, that people know them. Suffering and violence trail the lives of those who are without such connections. Students who thrive have had parents or teachers who have provided a wealth of opportunities for deep connection with ideas, with authors, with other people, inside and outside the classroom. And it's not that hard to frame our curriculum, so this has to happen. So it's required and rewarded. The tragedy of education is how easily it could be different, even under current constraints. With just a few changes to what we already do, with some simple reframings, we could meet our students' basic human needs for motivation, accomplishment, and community. This is the promise of the new Common Core, and I'm grabbing it with both hands, and I think you should too. But of course, as always, the big question is, how will they be implemented? What happens when the rubber meets the road? We all have to be a force for the positive possibilities of the Common Core. Even if the Common Core was crummy, which it's not, but even if it was, I would be saying to you, how do you leverage it for the most positive possibilities? Because it's put into law, and it's not only coming, it's here. And if your school isn't working on the Common Core and preparing for these assessments, you're behind the curve, and you better start yelling when you get back to your school, because that's to the detriment of your school community and to your kids. But the Common Core is good, so I think we really have to be talking it up and be positive and thinking, how can we leverage the most positive way of implementing it? You know, schooling in the industrial age was basically educating kids for discipline. Do what we tell you, right? We're in a different age now. We're in an information age. So schooling today is about creating motivated and self-reliant democratic citizens. We've moved from trying to create people who will do what they are told to people who can think for themselves. And as I said early in this talk, if we don't teach kids to be problem solvers who've learned how to learn, who can think for themselves, we're basically screwed. Because the problems of the future are going to require those kinds of people. We need risk-taking entrepreneurs, converging and continuously emerging professions tied to globalizing contexts and technological advances. We need initiative, wisdom, and joy. So what are our bottom lines as teachers? To promote real reading and writing? To promote democracy? To promote democratic citizenship? Then how are we being democratic and requiring kids to be democratic? How are we engaged in real reading and real writing the way real readers and writers do in our classroom? There's a very elegant idea from cognitive science. It's called the correspondence concept. And this is all it is. If you teach your kids anything in a single lesson or activity, at the end of that activity or lesson, they better have something in their head that corresponds more closely to what an expert has in his or her head than they did at the beginning of the activity. Or you not only taught them nothing, you probably made them stupider. Now, I've spent a lot of time making kids stupider in my life, and I am very embarrassed by the big example, so I'm going to give you a small one. For many years, I taught my kids, do not split infinitives. Take down your favorite author and read 10 pages. She's splitting infinitives. There are things you cannot possibly express in English if you do not split infinitives. It's a rule of Latin inappropriately applied to English by test makers. Always trying to make things objective that are not. I was making my kids stupider. My daughters go to school every day and they get made stupider in every subject, particularly math. My poor daughter Fiona, she came home one day, she's studying for a math test. I said, what's the problem? She goes, I don't know how to do this. And I said, when would you use this kind of algorithm in life? And she said, you wouldn't. And I said, no, this was actually invented to solve real world problems. When would you use it? She goes, in school. Well, that's the first sign you got. You haven't met the correspondence concept. The kids need to know, how does this count in my life? How does this make a difference to me and to my world? So, we had this big argument, and I said, what's the foundational principle behind this? Because if you don't learn foundational principles, you have not learned. And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, it's called distributive property. She goes, never heard of it. Oh, I went wild. Like, you've got 2 years of algebra, of course you've heard of distributive. You know, I went to the index, there's 300 references to it. I know she's heard of it, but not in a context of use. So she never had to understand it. She never internalized it. Now, she got an A on the test. On our ISATs, our state exam, which, by the way, does not reflect what real mathematicians think or do, nor does it reflect our actual state standards, but I digress. She was 96th percentile. By any common measure or accepted standard, she's a great math student. I wish she'd never had the classes because she learned things no mathematician would ever think or do. There's only one way to solve every problem. No mathematician thinks that. You don't have to think with general principles. No mathematician thinks that. I don't have to justify my work as long as I get the right answer. No mathematician thinks that. She learned a bunch of stuff that was deleterious, and I wish she'd never had the classes. Why didn't the teachers employ the correspondence concept? What am I going to teach the kids that'll help them think more like real mathematicians? When she reads the newspaper, I want her thinking like a real mathematician. I don't want her thinking like a fake mathematician. And even if she can't think exactly like a real mathematician, I want her moving down the continuum toward that goal. I'm going to conclude by telling one more story about Fiona, poor girl. We moved from Maine, where it was a single-track school. So, same 20 kids every year. Small town. We moved to Boise. Well, I shouldn't say big city, but it's a city. And she, you know, was in a middle school that there were 450 kids in 7th grade. And she's in a house with 150 kids. And at the end of the first semester, she goes, Dad, nobody knows me. Well, those people should have done the friendship unit. Because she went a semester without any teacher intervening and trying to integrate her into the school. That's a problem. And I said, well, why does nobody know you? She goes, Dad, we just sit in rows and the teachers go yada, 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 and you never get to talk to anybody. And I said, well, you'll just have to do something to get noticed. Which I immediately regret. It could have been worse. What she did was she rewrote a lab report into poetry with cartoons. The teacher gives it back, and you can see he was angry. It was a big red 0, incorrect lab report format. Now, I say this under all advisement. The teacher's an idiot. Come on, she's been doing the right lab report for a semester. He should be thinking, how come she went to all this trouble? And the very easy answer is, she wanted to be noticed. She went a whole semester without anybody knowing she was artistic and creative and funny. How does that happen? Now, I get no problem if the teacher says, you know, Fiona, I had no idea how artistic you were. And this really made me laugh. You are hilarious. And I would love to post it on the bulletin board. However, you do know it was incorrect lab report format, and I'd like you to redo it. I got no problem with that. But he gives her a 0. What has he done? She can no longer get an A for the quarter. And he has taught her, scientists don't experiment. Scientists don't take risks. Scientists don't try out new stuff. So don't be doing it here. Now, I gotta say, a couple years ago, I was teaching 7th grade, and 2 boys wrote a very unflattering poem about me. It involved nose hair and some other things I can't mention. Why did the 2 boys write such an unflattering poem about me? Because they like me. And they're boys, so they can't say that. Now, if I'd have really been offended, I would have said, guys, you know, come on. But I wasn't offended. I was very excited. These were not the kind of kids you would have predicted would be writing poetry. So I said, this is awesome, and I posted it on the bulletin board, and I guarantee you it is the most read poem in school history. I had kids showing up I didn't even know. There's a poem in here! That's a victory. And it's an opportunity to talk about how literature and literacy can be a way of relating to each other in different ways. What are your bottom lines? I'm going to urge you, articulate them and don't let yourself off the hook. I can only speak for myself. I love letting myself off the hook. I love saying, today is a bad day, I don't have to reach that bottom line. I am tired today, I don't have to reach that bottom line. I've got to stop letting myself off the hook. Every day I say to my student teachers, what's the bottom line? If teaching and learning is relational, notice every kid. I know it's going to be hard. If a kid has a haircut, say, nice haircut. You've got to do it. If literacy and the purpose of it is to lead to transformation and democratic living and conjoint projects, then you better make sure your teaching works explicitly every day towards those ends. I thank you for being the kind of people to undertake that challenge, and I wish that you go forth and spread sweetness and light. Thank you very much.